How the moon moves the ocean. Hello, my dear friends. Hello and welcome. It is your old friend, Science Nap Scientist. Here again, settled into my favorite chair by the window, ready to share a story with you. Can you hear them? The waves? They are my constant companions here in my little cottage by the sea. They are speaking to us, you know. They've been speaking since the dawn of time, telling a story of immense distances and incredible power, a story of a deep and abiding connection. Tonight, I want to share that story with you. Tonight, I'll tell you about a magical dance, an ancient, silent, and powerful ballet performed across the vastness of space between our planet Earth and its closest celestial companion, the moon. This dance is what moves our mighty oceans, creating the gentle rhythm of the tides. For many, many years, I buried myself in books and laboratories, studying the intricate laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. I have peered through microscopes at the tiniest forms of life and gazed through telescopes at galaxies so far away their light has traveled for millions of years to reach us. Science has been the great adventure of my life, a journey of discovery that has filled me with wonder. But no matter how far my mind traveled into the cosmos or deep into the atom, my heart always stayed close to the shore. There is a truth here, a tangible, living science that you can feel on your skin and hear with your own ears. I would come here to this very spot long before this little cottage was even built. I'd sit on the cool sand as a young man, my notebooks filled with equations and theories, and I'd watch how the distant silver moon pulls the colossal weight of the water, how the entire ocean seems to breathe in and out, with a calmness and certainty that can soothe any troubled soul. It is a spectacle of nature so grand, yet so gentle, that it feels like a secret whispered just for you. So tonight, I invite you to join me. Find a comfortable spot, perhaps in your bed, ready for sleep, or in a quiet chair where you can rest your head. Dim the lights. Let the worries of the day dissolve like sea foam on the sand. Make yourself comfortable. Close your eyes if you wish, and just listen. Listen to my voice. Listen to the peaceful rhythm of nature that I've brought here for you. And let us embark on this journey together into the heart of the great cosmic dance. Are you ready? Good. Let us begin. 1. The moon's gentle pull. A sea of secrets. The moon is our closest friend in the sky. Its gravity gently pulls the ocean water towards itself. That's why we see the high tide when the sea rises. To understand the tides, my friends, we must first talk about a force. An invisible, mysterious, and utterly fundamental force that governs everything in the universe. From the falling of an apple to the clustering of galaxies, this force is, of course, gravity. Now, force sounds like a very strong, very aggressive word, doesn't it? We think of pushing and shoving. But gravity, especially the moon's gravity acting upon the Earth, is better thought of as a gentle, persistent, and irresistible call. Long ago, when I first began my formal studies in physics, I was utterly captivated by this idea. I would sit in lecture halls. The professor would fill the blackboard with complex equations, symbols, and numbers that described this universal attraction. But for me, the magic was lost in the chalk dust. The real understanding came later, right here on this very coastline. I thought, how can that small, silent orb of rock, hanging so far away in the blackness of space, a quarter of a million miles away, how can it possibly reach out and pull our vast, heavy, mighty ocean? It seemed impossible. The answer, as I came to understand, it is both simple and profound. It's like an invisible string. Imagine you have a ball on the end of a string, and you are spinning around. You can feel the pull of the ball, can't you? Gravity is like a web of countless trillions of these strings, connecting every piece of matter to every other piece of matter. The moon is constantly pulling on the Earth, and the Earth is constantly pulling on the moon. It is this pull that keeps the moon in its orbit. It's preventing it from flying off into space. But here is the secret. The moon's gravitational pull is not uniform across the entire Earth. Think about it. The side of the Earth that is directly facing the moon is closer to it than the center of the Earth, and the center of the Earth is closer to the moon than the very opposite side of the Earth. This difference, though it seems small to us, is the key to everything. The water on the side of the Earth facing the moon feels the moon's pull most strongly. Because water is liquid and can move freely, it responds to this pull by piling up, flowing from other areas to create a bulge. This bulge of water is what we call high tide. When your spot on the coast rotates into this bulge, you see the sea level rise. The waves creep further up the beach, and the ocean seems to swell with a great deep breath. But here's the part that truly puzzled me as a young student, the part that reveals the beautiful complexity of this dance. If the moon is pulling the water towards it on one side, you would expect the water on the other side of the planet to be at low tide, wouldn't you? It seems logical. That's not what happens. Surprisingly, the ocean on the side of the Earth opposite the moon also swells up. There are two high tides on Earth at any given time, on opposite sides of the planet. This is sometimes called the dual tide effect, and for a long time it was a great sea of secrets for me. So why does this happen? There are two ways to think about it, and both help paint the picture. The first way is to think about that. Gravitational pull again. The moon pulls most strongly on the water on the near side. It pulls a little less strongly on the solid Earth itself. It pulls least strongly on the water on the far side, because it's furthest away, so you can. Imagine it like this. The moon is pulling the entire Earth system towards it, but it's pulling the different parts at slightly different rates. The near side water is pulled away from the Earth, creating a bulge, and the solid Earth is pulled away from the far side water, essentially leaving that water behind, which also creates a bulge. It's a beautiful, symmetrical effect born from a simple difference in distance. The other way to think about it, which I find very helpful, is to remember that the moon doesn't just orbit the Earth. In reality, the Earth and moon orbit a common point, a shared center of mass called the barycenter. Because the Earth is so much more massive than the moon, this point is actually inside the Earth, about 1,000 miles below the surface. But it's not at the very center. This means the Earth itself is performing a little wobble, a little dance, as the moon circles it. Now imagine you're on a fast-spinning merry-go-round. You feel a force pushing you outwards, don't you? This is an inertial force. On the side of the Earth opposite the moon, the ocean water feels this outward-flinging inertial force more strongly than the moon's inward gravitational pull. This outward fling creates the second high tide bulge. So we have one bulge created by gravity's direct pull, and another created by the rotational inertia of the system. Two forces working in concert to give our planet its two daily high tides. It is an exquisite balance, a cosmic partnership written in the language of water and gravity. I must have been only 6 or 7 years old, my own grandfather. A man with a face as weathered as the coastal cliffs and hands as tough as old rope. Took me to the beach for the first time at night. I remember the air was cool and smelled of salt and drying seaweed. The stars were scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds on black velvet. And there, hanging above the dark, murmuring water, was a brilliant full moon. God, it was so bright. It laid a shimmering path of silver light across the waves. A path that seemed to lead directly to us. I was a curious child, full of questions. I pointed a chubby finger at the line of wet sand, far up the beach where we had built our sandcastle earlier that day. "Grandpa," I asked, "why is the water sleeping so close to us now?" This morning it was far away. My grandfather didn't speak for a long time. He just stood there, the wind gently tousling his white hair, and he looked from the moon to the sea and back again. Then he knelt, putting his heavy hand on my small shoulder. He didn't give me a scientific explanation about barycenters or differential gravity. He was a fisherman, not a physicist. But he knew the truth of it in his bones. He said, "Look, my boy. Look at the moon and look at the sea. They are old, old friends. They are tied together by an unseen rope. When the moon climbs high in the sky, it pulls on its old friend, and the sea reaches up to greet it. It is a promise they keep every day forever. An unseen rope." All these years later, after a lifetime spent studying the very physics that defines that rope, I still believe his explanation is the truest one. It speaks to the poetry of the universe, to the connection that binds all things. The moon and the sea are indeed tied together, And I've come to realize that without the moon's gentle, constant, and faithful pull, our seas would be tragically different. They would lie still and quiet, great placid lakes with no pulse, no rhythm. The coastlines would be stagnant, the water less mixed, less full of life. The ocean's great heart would beat much, much slower. That silent, distant friend in our night sky doesn't just give us light. It gives our entire planet a heartbeat. 2. Natural tides. The Earth's calm breath, every tide, is like the Earth's breath. The water comes in, then goes out, like inhaling and exhaling. So we have these two great bulges of water, one on the side of the Earth facing the moon, and one on the opposite side. Now, the Earth, as you know, is a restless planet. It is constantly spinning on its axis, completing one full rotation every 24 hours. This spin is what gives us our day and night. But it's also what turns the static tidal bulges into the dynamic. Moving tides we experience on our shores. Imagine you are standing still. A big, slow-moving wave, a wave the size of a continent, is approaching you. As you enter the wave, the water level around you rises. As the crest of the wave passes over you, you are at its highest point. And as you exit the wave on the other side, the water level falls again. This is precisely what is happening with the tides, but on a planetary scale. The tidal bulges stay more or less aligned with the moon, while the solid Earth spins beneath them. Our coastlines are carried into one of these bulges, and we experience a high tide. Then, as the Earth continues to spin, we are carried out of the bulge, and the water level falls. This is the ebbing tide. We then reach the point of lowest water level, what we call low tide. Continuing our journey, we spin into the second bulge. On the opposite side of the Earth, and the tide rises once again for a second high tide. Finally, we leave that bulge, and the tide falls back to its low point, completing the cycle. This is why, along most of the world's coastlines, we experience what is known as a semi-diurnal tide. Semi-diurnal is just a fancy scientific term, meaning twice a day, 2 high tides and 2 low tides. It's happening in a continuous, predictable rhythm. Now, you might think that if the Earth spins once every 24 hours, a high tide should be followed by the next high tide exactly 12 hours later. That would be logical, wouldn't it? But the universe is always a little more clever than our simple assumptions. You see, while the Earth is spinning, the moon is not standing still. It is also orbiting the Earth, moving in the same direction as the Earth's rotation. So, after the Earth has completed one full 24-hour spin, the moon has moved a little bit further in its orbit. The Earth has to rotate for an extra 50 minutes or so to catch up to the moon and be back in the same position relative to it. This means that a full tidal cycle from one high tide, through a low tide to the next high tide, and through the second low tide, and back to the start is not 24 hours, but approximately. It's 24 hours and 50 minutes. This is why the tides don't happen at the same time every day. If you go to the beach and notice that high tide is at 3 p.m. today, you can be almost certain that tomorrow it will be around 3:50 p.m. It's a beautifully reliable clock, set not by human hands, but by the celestial mechanics of our solar system. This constant rise and fall, this inhaling and exhaling of the ocean, is one of the most powerful forces shaping our world. Without this rhythm, the beaches we know and love wouldn't be shaped the way they are. The tide is a grand artist. The ebb and flow carry sand and sediment, depositing them in some places, carving them away from others. It builds sandbars, scours channels, and polishes stones until they are smooth as glass. The very line between land and sea is drawn and redrawn every single day by this gentle, persistent breath. For centuries. Indeed, for millennia, human life along the coasts has been interwoven with this rhythm. Fishermen have learned to use the outgoing tide to carry their boats out to sea, and the incoming tide to help them return to harbor. The founders of great port cities like London, Hamburg, and Venice understood that the tide was their friend, allowing large ships to travel far inland, bringing trade and prosperity. Coastal towns, with their piers and harbors and seawalls, are all monuments to our long and intimate relationship with the ocean's breath. We have learned, out of necessity and respect, to live in harmony with this grand planetary rhythm. I have a very vivid memory from my time as a young researcher. I was on a small, rugged island off the coast of Scotland. The community there was tiny, just a handful of families, and their lives were as intertwined with the sea as the seaweed clinging to the rocks. I was there to study the unique geology of the island's cliffs, but I ended up learning more about life than about rocks. There was a small natural harbor where the fishermen kept their boats. It was a perfect crescent of sand, protected from the worst of the Atlantic storms, but it was very, very shallow. During low tide, the sea would retreat almost half a mile, leaving the entire harbor as a vast expanse of wet, rippled sand and mud. The fishing boats, sturdy and colorful, would be left stranded, leaning on their keels, like tired beasts resting in a field. They looked so helpless, so utterly stuck. I remember watching a young boy from the village, no older than 10, trying, with all his might, to push one of the smaller dinghies. He grunted and strained, his bare feet sinking into the mud, but the boat wouldn't budge. It was a perfect metaphor for futility. Later that afternoon, sat on a grassy bank overlooking the harbor, sipping a flask of hot tea, and I watched the magic happen. The tide began to turn. At first it was imperceptible, just a darkening of the distant sand. Then, small fingers of water started to probe the channels and rivulets. Slowly, silently, the sea began to creep back in. It surrounded the rocks, filled the pools, and began to lap at the hulls of the stranded boats. Within a couple of hours, the scene was transformed. The vast expanse of sand was gone, replaced by a deep, blue-green basin of water, and the boats, which had seemed so hopelessly stuck just a short while before, were now floating. They bobbed gently on the water, tugging at their mooring ropes, eager to be free. The boy I had seen earlier was now in his dinghy, rowing it with ease around the harbor, his face beaming with joy. The boats were not stuck. They were simply waiting. They were waiting for the earth to take its next breath. That image has never left me. It taught me a profound lesson about patience and trust. There are times in our own lives when we feel stuck, when we feel stranded in the mud, and no amount of pushing and straining seems to help. In those moments, it's wise to remember the boats in that Scottish harbor. Sometimes the best thing to do is not to struggle, but to wait with faith, to trust that the tide will turn, that the world will breathe again, and that the very forces of nature will come to lift us up and set us free once more. This is how the ocean breathes in its rhythm. It not only keeps the planet alive, but it also teaches us how to live. 3. Tide variety and Earth's spin tides aren't the same everywhere. The Earth's spin and the shape of the land make the dance even more colorful. Now, my dear friends, if the world were a perfect smooth sphere, covered uniformly, in water of a constant depth, the story of the tides would be quite simple. We would have 2 high tides and 2 low tides everywhere, every day with the same height, like a perfectly regular heartbeat. But our Earth, thankfully, is far more interesting than that. It is a planet of magnificent complexity, with vast continents, deep ocean trenches, shallow seas, and intricate coastlines. This complex geography interferes with the simple movement of the tidal bulges, creating a breathtaking variety of tidal patterns around the world. The tidal bulge, see, is not just a simple pile of water. It is a true wave called a tidal wave. But do not confuse this with a tsunami. A tsunami is a single destructive wave caused by an earthquake or a landslide. A tidal wave is a vast, planet-sized wave with a wavelength that stretches halfway around the world. As the Earth spins, this colossal wave tries to sweep across the ocean basins, but its path is blocked and distorted by the continents. Imagine trying to drag a wide sheet across a floor covered in furniture. The sheet would get snagged, bunched up, and diverted. This is what happens to the tidal wave. It cannot simply sweep across the globe. Instead, it is forced into complex patterns within the ocean basins, sloshing back and forth, reflecting off coastlines, and circulating around points of no tide at all. This leads to different types of tidal cycles. While the semi-diurnal tide, 2 highs and 2 lows per day is the most common. It is not the only one. In some places, like the Gulf of Mexico, the shape of the basin is such that they only experience 1 high tide and 1 low tide per day. This is called a diurnal tide. In other places still, the pattern is a mixture of the two, with 2 tides a day, but of very different heights. This is called a mixed semi-diurnal tide, and it's common along the Pacific coast of North America. Furthermore, the Earth's spin itself adds another layer of complexity. There is a phenomenon known as the Coriolis effect. It's a bit tricky to explain, but essentially, because the Earth is a rotating sphere, any object moving over its surface for a long distance gets deflected. In the northern hemisphere, moving objects are deflected to the right, and in the southern hemisphere, they are deflected to the left. This effect is what helps create the circular patterns of hurricanes and ocean currents. It also affects the tides. The incoming tidal flow is deflected, and the outgoing EB current is also deflected, creating complex rotary currents in many bays and estuaries. The dance becomes a grand, swirling waltz. But perhaps the most dramatic effect of geography on the tides is the amplification that can occur in certain bays and estuaries. If a bay has a particular shape and depth, the tidal wave entering it can create a resonance. It is similar to pushing a child on a swing. If you push at just the right moment in the swing's arc, you add energy, and the child goes higher and higher. In the same way, if the natural sloshing back, pan-forth time of a bay matches the timing of the incoming tide, the tide can be amplified. 2 incredible heights. And this brings us to the most spectacular tidal display on our entire planet, the Bay of Fundy. It's located between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick in Canada. The Bay of Fundy is a huge funnel-shaped bay. Its length and depth are almost perfectly tuned to resonate with the Atlantic tide. The result is simply astonishing. While a typical ocean tide might be a few feet, the tides in the Bay of Fundy can have a range of over 50 feet. That is higher than a 4-story building. The water level can rise at a rate of several feet per hour. You can literally watch the sea climb the cliffs. It is one of the true natural wonders of the world. A place where the gentle pull of the distant moon is transformed by local geography into a display of immense and awe-inspiring power. I will never, ever forget my first visit to the Bay of Fundy. I was in my 40s. A seasoned scientist who thought he had a good grasp of the physics of tides. I had read the papers, seen the data, and understood the principles of resonance. But my friends, let me tell you, understanding a thing and witnessing it are 2 completely different worlds. Nothing can prepare you for the sheer scale of it. I went to a place called Hopewell Rocks, where years of these massive tides have carved the sandstone cliffs into strange, wonderful shapes that look like giant flower pots at low tide. I walked on the ocean floor. It was a surreal experience. The floor was a vast expanse of reddish-brown mud and rock, and these enormous flower pot formations towered above me, their bases narrow and their tops covered in trees and shrubs. I felt like an ant in a giant's garden. The scale was hard to comprehend. High above my head, I could see the dark line on the rocks marking the high water mark. It seemed impossibly high. I found a safe spot on the cliffs above, set up my camera, and waited, and I watched. For 6 hours, I watched. The ocean return didn't come in as a crashing wave, but as a relentless, unstoppable flood. The water poured into the bay, a great river of brown, silt-laden seawater. It crept up the beach, swallowed the smaller rocks, and began to climb the bases of the giant flower pots. The sound was not of waves, but of a steady, powerful current, a deep, resonant roar that seemed to come from the very chest of the earth. The most incredible part was watching boats that had been moored at a dock. At low tide, the dock was 100 feet above the mudflats. The boats were tied with immensely long ropes. As the tide came in, the boats rose and rose and rose until they were floating level with the top of the dock. The sheer volume of water moving into that bay is staggering, billions of tons of it, all pulled by the gravity of the moon and amplified by the shape of the land. Watching that spectacle, I felt a profound sense of humility. My scientific knowledge, my equations, my theories, they all felt so small and pale in the face of such raw natural power. It was like reading the sheet music for a grand symphony, and then, for the first time, actually hearing it performed by a full orchestra in a magnificent concert hall. The notes on the page are the science, but the performance, the sound, the feeling, the emotion, that is the truth of it. It's like watching the Earth's heartbeat in the Bay of Fundy. That heartbeat is not a gentle murmur. It is a powerful, thundering drum that reminds us of the immense forces that shape our world. 4. The sun's role. A special guest. The moon isn't alone the sun. Our own star joins this dance too. Up to this point, my dear friends, we have been speaking almost exclusively about the moon, and for good reason. The moon is the prima ballerina in our cosmic dance of the tides. It is the primary force, the main conductor of this oceanic symphony. But it is not the only dancer on the stage. There is another, far larger and more powerful celestial body whose gravity also touches our world. The sun. The sun, of course, is the center of our solar system. Its mass is immense, over 27 million times the mass of our moon, and its gravitational pull is what holds our Earth in its yearly orbit. In fact, the sun's gravitational pull on the Earth is about 179 times stronger than the moon's. So, a very logical question arises. It's one that I remember asking my own professor with great confusion. If the sun's gravity is so much stronger, why isn't it the main cause of our tides? Why do we call them lunar tides and not solar tides? The answer, once again, lies in that subtle but crucial concept of differential gravity. Remember how the tide-raising force comes from the difference in the moon's pull on the near side of the Earth versus the far side? Well, the same principle applies to the sun. The sun also creates two tidal bulges on Earth for the very same reason. It pulls more strongly on the sun-facing side and less strongly on the night side, creating a solar tide. However, because the sun is so incredibly far away, about 400 times farther away than the moon, the difference in its gravitational pull across the Earth is much smaller. Earth's diameter is a tiny fraction of our distance to the sun. So, while the sun's overall grip is mighty, stretching or tide-raising force is significantly weaker than the moon's. In fact, the solar tide is only about 46% as high as the lunar tide. The moon, being our close neighbor, wins the tidal competition due to proximity. But here's where the story gets truly interesting. The sun's effect, while secondary, is still very significant. The actual tide we experience on any given day is the combination of the lunar tide and the solar tide, and this is where the dance becomes a duet. Sometimes the moon and the sun pull together, and sometimes they pull at cross-dash purposes. Think about the alignment of these three bodies: the sun, the earth, and the moon. Twice a month, they all line up in a straight line. This happens during the new moon, when the moon is between the sun and the earth, and we cannot see its illuminated face. And it happens again during the full moon, when the earth is between the sun and the moon, and we see the moon's face. Fully lit, when this alignment occurs, the gravitational forces of the sun and the moon are working together, pulling on the Earth's oceans in the same direction. The solar tidal bulge is added on top of the lunar tidal bulge. The result is a tide of maximum range, the highest high tides and the lowest low tides. These are called spring tides. The name has nothing to do with the season of spring. It comes from an old word, springen, which means to leap or to spring up, because the water seems to leap up the shore. Spring tides are the grand crescendos of the tidal rhythm. But what about the other times of the month? When the moon is in its first quarter or third quarter phase, it is positioned at a right angle to the sun relative to the Earth. You can picture it as a giant L in space, with the Earth at the corner. During these times, the moon and the sun are not working together. The moon is trying to create a high tide in one direction, while the sun is trying to create a high tide 90 degrees away from that in this configuration. The gravitational pulls are competing with each other. The sun's tidal bulge effectively diminishes the moon's tidal bulge. Result is a tide of minimum range. The high tides are lower than average, and the low tides are higher than average. The difference between high and low tide is the smallest it can be. These much weaker tides are called nip tides. The word nip is thought to come from an old Anglo-Saxon word meaning without power. Nip tides are the quiet, gentle interludes in the fortnightly tidal cycle. So, our oceans are in a constant state of flux, rising and falling in this beautiful, complex pattern. There is the daily rhythm of the too high and too low tides, driven by the Earth's spin. And layered on top of that is the fortnightly rhythm of spring and neap tides, driven by the moon's orbit around the Earth and its changing alignment with the sun. It is a dance of multiple partners. It's a symphony of overlapping rhythms that makes our coastlines such dynamic and ever-changing places. I have a memory that is as clear to me now as the night it happened. I was staying in a small fishing village on the Atlantic coast of France. It was a time of great personal stress for me. A large research project I was leading had run into serious difficulties. I felt the weight of responsibility very heavily. I hadn't been sleeping well. My mind was a constant whirl of problems and anxieties. One evening, unable to sleep, I walked down to the harbor. It was a perfect, clear night, and a magnificent full moon was rising over the sea. What's one? Of those moons that looks impossibly large and orange as it climbs above the horizon. I knew from the local tide chart that it was the peak of the bi-monthly spring tide. The moon was full. It's lining up perfectly with the sun on the other side of the earth. I sat on the cold stone of the sea wall and I watched. The tide was coming in, but it was unlike any normal tide. It was a force of nature. It surged into the harbor, not with violence, but with a quiet, indomitable power. The water rose with a speed that was visibly apparent, covering the lower steps of the quay, swallowing half the beach in a matter of an hour. The sound was a deep, resonant hum, the sound of an immense volume of water on the move. The moonlight cast that brilliant, silvery path across the water, and it seemed to me that the ocean was alive, reaching, swelling with energy in that moment. Watching that powerful spring tide, I felt my own problems begin to shrink. I was witnessing the combined gravitational will of the sun and the moon, two celestial giants playing out upon the grand stage of the ocean. My project, my worries, my sleepless nights, they all seemed so laughably small in comparison. I felt a sense of perspective wash over me, as powerful as the tide itself. I was just a tiny part of this immense, beautiful, powerful universe. Later that week, the moon had waned to its third quarter. I walked down to the same spot on the seawall. It was a neap tide. The high tide that evening was gentle, almost timid. It barely covered the lower part of the beach. The water was calm, lapping quietly at the shore. The energy, the power, the drama of the spring tide was gone, replaced by a deep sense of peace and tranquility, and I thought to myself, this is the rhythm of life itself. There are springtide moments in our lives, times of great energy. High drama and powerful emotions, when forces align and events feel overwhelming. And there are neap tide moments, times of quiet, rest, and gentle recovery. When things are calm and the differences seem too small, we need both. We cannot live our lives at the peak of a spring tide forever. We would be exhausted. Nor can we live in the stillness of a neap tide. We would stagnate. The beauty of life, just like the beauty of the ocean, lies in the rhythm. In the dance between the two, the moon's light, the sun's pull, and the ocean's waves were dancing together, and they taught me that my own life was a dance as well. 5. Tidal complexity, geography, and depth. Not every coast is the same. The shape of the shoreline and the depth of the seafloor dramatically change the tide's look and behavior. My dear friends, we have established the grand celestial forces at play, the pull of the moon and the sun, creating the tidal bulges. We have seen how the Earth's spin turns these bulges into the moving tidal waves that give us our daily tides. To truly understand why the tide at your local beach looks the way it does, we must leave the heavens for a moment and dive deep into the ocean itself. We must become oceanographers and geographers, because the shape of our world, its continents, its islands, the very contours of the seafloors, The final and most intricate factor in this story. Imagine the tidal wave. That continent-sized bulge of water as a grand, majestic river flowing across the planet. Now imagine this river encounters a vast mountain range, a continent. It cannot flow over it. It must flow around it. The continents act as enormous barriers, or baffles, that completely disrupt the simple east-west progression of the tide. The Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean each is a giant basin in which the tidal wave is trapped and forced to behave in very complex ways. Inside these basins, the tidal wave doesn't just travel in a straight line. It sloshes. It is a bit like tilting a large rectangular tub of water. The water will surge to one side, then slosh back to the other. But because the Earth is spinning, the Coriolis effect, that deflecting force we talked about, comes into play. It turns this simple back-and-forth slosh into a great circular, rotating motion. This creates one of the most fascinating features of the real-world tides: amphidromic points. An amphidromic point is like the hub of a wheel. It is a point in the center of an ocean basin where the tidal wave rotates around, and at this central point, there is almost no tidal range at all. The water level hardly changes. If you could anchor a boat precisely at an amphidromic point, you would see the tide as a wave rotating around you, high on one side, low on the other. But you would barely move up and down. From these central hubs, the spokes of the tidal wave radiate outwards. These are called co-tidal lines, and they connect all the locations that experience high tide at the same time. The further you get from the amphidromic point, the greater the tidal range becomes. The British Isles, for example, are surrounded by a very complex system of these amphidromic points in the North Sea and the Atlantic, which is why the tides around their coasts are so varied and strong. In contrast, a place like the Mediterranean Sea is almost completely enclosed by land. It has only a very narrow connection to the Atlantic at the Strait of Gibraltar. The main oceanic tide cannot get in. As a result, the tides in the Mediterranean are tiny, often just a few inches. The Romans barely even noticed them. Now let's zoom in even closer. From the scale of ocean basins to the scale of a single coastline, the local geography. What scientists call the bathymetry, the shape of the seafloor, and the topography, the shape of the coast. This plays a huge role. If a coastline is very steep, with deep water right up to the shore, the tide can come in and go out quite quickly. And the difference between the high and low water marks on the shore might be vertical, but not very wide. You find this on rocky, fjord-like coasts, such as in Norway or parts of New Zealand. However, if a coast has a very gentle, shallow slope, with a wide continental shelf extending far out to sea, the effect is completely different. As the tidal wave moves from the deep ocean into these shallow waters, it slows down and piles up, increasing its height. Then, as this large volume of water moves on to the gently sloping beach, it has to spread out over a vast area. This is why some beaches, like those on the west coast of England or the northern coast of France, have such an enormous horizontal tidal range. At low tide, the sea can retreat for miles, exposing huge, flat expanses of sand and mud. The shape of the coastline itself also acts as a funnel or a barrier. A wide-open, straight coastline will experience a very different tide from a V-shaped bay or a narrow estuary. A bay that narrows towards the land, like the Bay of Fundy or the Bristol Channel in the UK, will squeeze the incoming tidal water, forcing its height to increase dramatically, a phenomenon called funneling. This is why some beaches are wide and sandy, perfect for a long walk, while others are rocky, narrow, and dramatic. The character of every single beach on Earth is a unique signature written by the interplay of cosmic forces and local geology. It is a local story within a global epic. I have a particularly fond memory of a research trip I took to the coast of Lancashire in the west of England, overlooking Morecambe Bay. This bay is famous for its vast, treacherous sand flats. Low tide, the sea retreats for up to 10 miles, leaving behind a shimmering, seemingly endless desert of wet sand. It is beautiful, but famously dangerous. The tide comes in faster than a man can run, and the sands are riddled with quicksand and deep channels that can trap the unwary. I went out onto the sands with a local guide, an old fellow named Arthur, who had been appointed the Queen's Guide to the Sands, a title that has existed for centuries. His job was to mark a safe path across the bay at low tide. Arthur knew those sands not as a scientist knows a map, but as a musician knows his instrument. He could read the ripples in the sand, the color of the water in the pools, the subtle shifts in the texture under his feet. As we walked, the sea was just a thin silver line on the distant horizon. The silence was immense, broken only by the cry of gulls and the wind. It felt like we were on another planet, Arthur pointed out. The dangers, the soft spots, the hidden channels. The sea, he said, with a thick local accent, she's a powerful lady. She gives us this great big playground for a few hours, but you must never forget that she'll be back to claim it. You'll never turn your back on her. And then he told me to stand still and listen. At first I heard nothing, but then a faint, low sound began to build. It was a soft, sibilant hiss, a whisper that grew into a murmur and then into a low roar. It was the sound of the returning tide, still miles away, but moving with astonishing speed across the flats. Arthur pointed. There she is, he said. The thin silver line on the horizon was now a visible white wall of water. Not a crashing wave, but a steady, inexorable flood. We made our way back to the safety of the shore, and from the promenade, we watched the transformation. Within 2 hours, that entire sandy desert had disappeared. The vast expanse was now a deep, swirling bay of water, lapping at the very seawall where we stood. A place where you could walk just a few hours before was now deep enough to sail a large boat, standing there. I felt a deep connection to the generations of people who had lived by that bay, whose lives were dictated by that rhythm. They didn't need equations to understand the tide. They felt it in their souls. They understood the power, the danger, and the beauty of it. That day I remember thinking that the ocean floor is not a static thing. It is a hidden landscape that is revealed and concealed twice every day. The tide gives us a temporary gift, a glimpse into a world that is normally submerged. It's a powerful reminder that the surface of things is not the whole story. The true character of a place, and perhaps of a person, lies in the depths that are only revealed when the tide is low. 6. Tides in nature and human life. Tides touch not just the water. They are the lifeblood of coastal ecosystems and have shaped human civilization for millennia. My dear friends, it is easy to think of the tides as a purely physical phenomena, simple matter of water moving up and down, driven by gravity. But to do so would be to miss the most beautiful part of the story. The tides are not just water. They are life. The constant rhythmic pulse of the ocean is the very heartbeat of some of the richest and most diverse ecosystems on our planet. The area between the high tide mark and the low tide mark, known as the intertidal zone, is a world of incredible resilience and adaptation. Imagine being an organism living in this zone. Twice a day, you are submerged in cool, salty seawater, and twice a day, you are exposed to the air, the sun, the wind, and predators from the land. You must be able to withstand the pounding force of the waves, and then the heat and dryness of the sun. It is one of the most challenging environments on Earth, and yet it is teeming with life. Walk along a rocky shore at low tide. Then you are walking through a natural museum of evolutionary genius. You will see barnacles, which are tiny crustaceans that cement themselves to the rocks and seal themselves shut with a small plate to keep from drying out. You will see mussels, clinging to the rocks in dense colonies with incredibly strong thread-like anchors. You'll find starfish, or sea stars, in the pools, with their remarkable ability to regrow lost arms. And you'll see sea anemones, which look like beautiful, soft flowers when underwater, but retract into gelatinous blobs to conserve moisture when the tide goes out. Each creature is a master of survival, perfectly adapted to the daily rhythm of the tide. This tidal flushing is also crucial for larger ecosystems. Think of the vast salt marshes and mangrove forests that fringe our coastlines in temperate and tropical regions. These are incredibly important habitats. They act as nurseries for countless species of fish and shellfish, providing food and shelter for their young. They are vital feeding grounds for millions of migratory birds. And they protect our coastlines from erosion and storm surges. Acting as a natural buffer, none of these ecosystems could exist without the tide. The tide brings in a fresh supply of nutrients with every flood, and it carries away waste products with every ebb. It prevents the water from becoming stagnant and oxygen deprived. The tide is the circulatory system of the coast, delivering life-giving sustenance and cleansing the environment with every single cycle. And just as the tides have shaped the natural world, they have profoundly shaped the human world. For as long as we have been a species that has looked to the sea, we have been a species that has respected the tides. For coastal communities, understanding the tidal rhythm was not a matter of scientific curiosity. It was a matter of life and death. Fishermen, for thousands of years, have known that certain fish feed on the incoming tide and have timed their efforts accordingly. They've used the strong ebb currents to carry their nets and the flood currents to bring them home.
Sailors
And merchants had to master the tides to navigate the treacherous entrances to harbors and estuaries. A captain who misjudged the tide could find his ship stranded on a sandbar for hours or even days, a helpless target for pirates or enemies. The great ports of the world were built on the tide. London, Antwerp, Hamburg, these cities are miles inland from the open sea. Yet they became global centers of trade because the high tide allowed the largest ocean-going vessels of their day to sail right up to their docks. The entire economic history of maritime nations is written in the language of tide tables. This deep, practical knowledge led to the creation of some of the first forms of scientific calendars. Ancient peoples, from the coastal tribes of the Pacific Northwest to the builders of Neolithic stone circles in places like Scotland, created sophisticated systems for predicting the tides. They observed the correlation between the phases of the moon and the height of the tides. They knew when the strong spring tides would occur and when the weaker neap tides would offer a period of calm. They understood that the ocean had a clock, a reliable and predictable timepiece governed by the heavens. And they built their lives, their work, and their cultures around its steady, dependable rhythm. If that rhythm were to break, or if we were to lose our understanding of it, life along every shore of our world would become immeasurably more difficult and dangerous. Many years ago, I had the privilege of spending some time with an indigenous community in the coastal regions of British Columbia, Canada. Their culture, for thousands of years, has been a culture of the sea and cedar. I was there to learn about the traditional ecological knowledge that had been passed down through generations. One afternoon, an elder of the community, a woman named Marion, took me down to the beach at low tide. This wasn't a sandy beach. It was a muddy, rocky, and seemingly barren expanse. But to her, it was a garden. She called it her low-tide grocery store. As we walked, she pointed out things I would never have seen. She showed me how to find different types of clams. By the shape of the little holes they left in the sand, while she pried oysters from the rocks, explaining that you only take the larger ones, leaving the smaller ones to grow. She found different kinds of edible seaweed, explaining their uses in soups and medicines. Within an hour, her basket was full of food that she had gathered from a landscape that, to my untrained eye, had looked empty. But the most fascinating part was her timing. She wasn't just walking aimlessly. She moved with a purpose that was clearly dictated by a deep, intuitive knowledge. She knew which parts of the beach would be exposed for the longest, and which would be covered first by the returning tide. She worked her way from the lowest point on the shore steadily up towards the high tide line. Always staying ahead of the incoming water, I asked her, "Marion, do you use a tide chart? A watch?" She laughed, a warm, rich sound. "Grandpa's scientist," she said, using the nickname the children in the village had given me. "The moon is my chart. The feel of the air is my watch." My ancestors didn't have paper. They had eyes, and they had memory. They watched. They saw that when the moon is a sliver, the tide is small. When the moon is fat and round, the tide is big and runs fast. They taught us to listen to the ocean's clock. "This clock," she said, gesturing to the entire bay, the sky and the sea rules our days. It tells us when to fish, when to travel. In our canoes, when to rest. It is not our enemy, it is our partner. That day I realized that science is not the only way of knowing. The charts and graphs in my books were just a different language for the same truth that Marian and her ancestors knew in their hearts and bones. They had a relationship with the tide that was as intimate and personal as a relationship with a family member. They knew its moods, its power, and its generosity. The ocean's clock didn't just rule their days, it sustained their lives. It was a profound lesson in how deeply human culture can be woven into the great natural rhythms of our planet. 7. Tidal power, a renewable source. The immense and predictable power of the tides can even light our homes. It's a clean and reliable source of renewable energy. For most of human history, my friends, we have looked at the tides with a mixture of respect, awe, and sometimes fear. We have learned to work with the tides, to schedule our lives around their rhythm. But in the last century, with our growing understanding of physics and engineering, a new idea began to take hold. What if we could do more than just work with the tides? What if we could harness their incredible power? The amount of energy contained in the daily movement of the tides is truly astronomical. Think of the billions of tons of water being lifted several meters up twice a day, every single day. This is a tremendous amount of potential energy gifted to us by the gravitational pull of the moon and sun. And as our world seeks out new sources of energy that do not pollute our atmosphere or warm our planet, the predictable, reliable power of the tides has become an area of intense interest and innovation. This is the science of tidal power. There are two main ways we have learned to capture this energy so far. The first and oldest method is called a tidal barrage. A tidal barrage is essentially a large dam built across a tidal estuary or bay. The barrage has gates, called sluice gates, and a series of turbines, which are like underwater windmills. The process is quite simple and elegant. As the high tide comes in, the sluice gates are opened, allowing the bay to fill up with water. Just as it would naturally, once the tide is at its peak, the gates are closed, trapping a huge volume of water behind the barrage at a high elevation. Then, as the tide goes out and the sea level on the other side of the barrage drops, a difference in water level is created: high water on one side, low water on the other. This difference is called the head. Now the magic happens. Trapped water is released through the turbines embedded in the barrage. The force of the flowing water spins the turbines, which in turn drive generators to produce electricity. Some of the most advanced tidal barrages are two-way systems. Can generate electricity on the outgoing tide and also on the incoming tide, capturing energy from the entire cycle. The oldest and one of the most famous examples is the Lorance Tidal Power Station in France, which has been operating successfully since 1966. The second, more modern approach involves tidal stream generators. If a tidal barrage is like a hydroelectric dam, a tidal stream generator is like an underwater wind turbine. These devices are placed directly into the path of strong tidal currents, such as in narrow straits or channels between islands where the water flows very fast. The moving water spins the large blades of the turbine, which, just like a wind turbine, generates electricity. The great advantage of tidal stream generators is that they have a much smaller environmental footprint than a large barrage, which can disrupt the delicate ecosystem of an estuary. Arrays of these underwater turbines can be installed on the seabed, quietly and invisibly harnessing the power of the currents flowing past. There are exciting projects like this being developed in places with very strong tidal flows, like the Orkney Islands in Scotland or off the coast of Wales. What makes tidal power so attractive as a renewable energy source is its utter predictability. Solar power depends on the sun shining. Wind power depends on the wind blowing. But the tides? They are as reliable as the sunrise. We can predict the exact time and height of the tides for decades, even centuries in advance. Know with absolute certainty how much power a tidal plant will generate tomorrow, next week, or next year. This reliability is incredibly valuable for managing a stable electricity grid. It is a clean, green, constant gift from our cosmic dance partner, the moon. I was fortunate enough in the later part of my career to be a consultant on a feasibility study for a new tidal energy project. It was a thrilling time. I was no longer the young man on the shore, marveling at the power of the sea. I was part of a team of engineers, ecologists, and planners, trying to figure out how to respectfully borrow some of that power for human use. I remember one day we were out on a survey boat in a narrow channel known for its ferocious tidal currents. Our task was to measure the speed of the water at the peak of the ebb tide. I was standing on the deck, holding onto a railing, and the sea around us was not calm. It wasn't stormy with high waves. Instead, it was a picture of immense, focused power. The water was moving like a massive river, so fast that it created standing waves and powerful, swirling whirlpools that could have easily capsized a smaller boat. The sound was a deep, guttural roar. The instruments showed the current was moving at over 8 knots. To put that in perspective, that is faster than many people can sprint. And this was not a small stream. It was millions of tons of seawater. Moving with relentless force, I put my hand over the side, just letting my fingers dip into the flow. The sheer pull of it was shocking. Felt like a living, breathing creature of immense strength was trying to pull my arm from its socket. In that moment, a young bright died. Engineer standing next to me shouted over the roar of the water, a huge grin on her face. "Can you feel that, Professor?"
Yes.
That's the gravity of the moon right there.
Yes.
We're touching the gravity of the moon. And she was absolutely right. The abstract concept of gravitational attraction across 250,000 miles of space was made real and tangible in the tug of that current. It was a profound and humbling experience. All the equations and theories were distilled into that one simple physical sensation. Later, when the project moved forward and the first prototype turbine was installed, there was a moment I will never forget. We were in the control room, a small building on the shore, watching the monitors. The turbine was in place, the tide was running, and it was time to connect it to the grid for the first time. The lead engineer gave the command. A switch was flipped, and on a small display panel, a single, ordinary light bulb lit up. There was a cheer in the room, of course, but I felt a quiet sense of awe. That light, that clean, simple, beautiful light, was being powered by the dance of the moon and the earth, the same waves that I had watched crash on the shore as a boy. The same rhythm that had lulled me to sleep in my cottage was now, through human ingenuity and respect for nature, helping to light our homes at night. I felt in my heart that this was the right way forward, not to conquer nature, but to learn to waltz with her. In that moment, I felt the ocean was truly, and in a new and wonderful way, our friend. 8. Geography and local variety. Earth's tidal dance, tides dance differently all around the world, creating a rich tapestry of unique coastal characters and stories. My dear friends, one of the greatest joys of a long life in science has been the opportunity to travel, to see with my own eyes how the universal laws of nature express themselves with such unique and local flavor. The law of gravity is the same in every corner of the globe, but the tides it produces are as varied as the cultures and coastlines of our world. To truly appreciate the tides, we must take a short journey around our planet. To see how this cosmic dance is performed on different stages, we have already visited the Bay of Fundy in Canada, the undisputed king of tides, where resonance in a funnel-shaped bay creates staggering 50-foot tidal ranges. This is a place of raw power, a landscape sculpted by the sheer force of moving water. Now, let us cross the Atlantic to the shores of Europe. The coasts of the British Isles are a fascinating and complex case study. The islands sit on a wide, shallow continental shelf and are caught between the tidal systems of the Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea. The result is a chaotic and wonderful variety of tides. In the Bristol Channel, between England and Wales, another funneling effect creates the second highest tidal range in the world, often exceeding 40 feet. This creates a remarkable phenomenon called the Severn Bore, where the incoming tide is forced up the narrowing river estuary so fast that it forms a series of large, smooth waves that travel for miles upriver against the river's current. People even come to surf on this tidal wave. Yet, just a few hundred miles away, on the coast of Suffolk, in the east of England, the tide is much more modest. Influenced by a nearby palindromic point in the North Sea, travels south to the Mediterranean Sea. And the story changes completely. As we discussed, this sea is like a great lake connected to the ocean by the thinnest of straws, the Strait of Gibraltar. The main Atlantic tide is too vast to squeeze through effectively. Consequently, most of the Mediterranean experience is tiny. Tides often less than a foot. The ancient city of Venice is a famous exception. Its tides, while not large by oceanic standards, are significant enough in its shallow lagoon to cause the famous aqualta, or high-water floods, that periodically inundate its streets. Let's journey now to the other side of the world, to the coast of Bangladesh and the Ganges Delta. This is a land of rivers, a low-lying landscape built from the silt of the Himalayas. Here, the tides of the Bay of Bengal push far, far inland, influencing the water level and the lives of millions of people hundreds of miles from the sea. The interaction between the river's powerful flow and the incoming tide creates a dynamic, ever-changing environment that is both incredibly fertile and dangerously vulnerable to storm surges, which are amplified by the high tides. And what about one of the most dramatic tidal events of all? We must go to China, to the Qiantan River. Here, the funnel shape of Hangzhou Bay creates the largest and most spectacular tidal bore in the world.
Oh.
During the peak spring tides, the incoming tide forms a single, massive wave, sometimes up to 30 feet high, that thunders up the river at speeds of up to 25 miles per hour. It is a terrifying and magnificent sight, a true wall of water that has been a source of awe and legend for centuries. From the roaring bores of China, to the gentle lapping tides of a Caribbean island, to the immense slow breathing of the Bay of Fundy, to the treacherous, fast-moving currents around Scotland's islands, Aylands H Place has its own tidal story, its own unique rhythm. This variety is not a flaw in the system. It is the Earth's beauty. It is the result of a universal song being played on a wonderfully complex and diverse instrument. It is the planet itself, adding its own geological signature to the music of the spheres. In all my travels, I learned that you can tell a great deal about a place by its relationship with the tide. The tide shapes not just the land, but the people. I remember standing on the coast of Normandy in France, on the historic D-Day beaches. The tidal range there is enormous. Low tide, the beach is a vast flat expanse of sand, hundreds of yards wide. I stood there and imagined what it must have been like for the young soldiers on that fateful day. The military planners had to be master tidal experts. They had to land at a specific point in the tidal cycle low enough to see the German obstacles hidden on the beach, but with the tide rising behind them to help lift their landing craft off the sand. The success or failure of that immense historical turning point rested, in part, on a correct prediction of the moon's dance. Standing there, the tide felt heavy with history. In stark contrast, I recall a trip to a small island in Greece, in the Aegean Sea. I sat at a small tavern by the water's edge, my table so close to the sea that I could almost touch it. I watched the water all day. It barely moved. The tide was a whisper, a gentle rise and fall of just a few inches. The fishing boats were tied to the dock with short, simple ropes. Life felt calm, steady, and sun-drenched. The sea was a constant friendly presence, a swimming pool, not a dynamic, powerful force to be reckoned with. The rhythm of life there was dictated by the sun, not the moon, and then I think of the Netherlands, country where a significant portion of the land is below sea level. For the Dutch, the tide is not a friend or a spectacle. It has historically been an existential threat. Their relationship with the sea is one of a constant, vigilant battle. Their incredible system of dikes, dams, and barriers, the famous delta, works as one of the engineering wonders of the world. It is a monument to a nation's resolve to hold back the high tide and the storm surge. There, the tide is a reminder of vulnerability and the power of human ingenuity. I've traveled to many shores, Some seas roar with huge waves that crash against granite cliffs, a sound of constant power and fury. Others whisper gently against palm-fringed sandy shores. Nature's never the same in two places. Each coastline has its own voice, its own personality, its own story to tell. And that story is always, always a duet between the universal pull of the heavens and the unique, stubborn, beautiful character of the earth itself. 9. Long-term changes. The moon and Earth's evolution, the dance between the moon and the earth, is not static. It is a living relationship that is slowly evolving over vast stretches of cosmic time. My friends, we have talked about the daily rhythm of the tides and the fortnightly cycle of springs and neaps. We have even touched upon the yearly cycles. But now, I want you to take a great step back with me, to zoom out not just in space, but in time. I want us to think in terms of not just hours or days, but millions and billions of years. Guess. The bond between the moon and the earth, this gravitational dance we have been exploring, is not a constant. It is changing, slowly, imperceptibly to us, but with profound consequences over the vastness of geological time. The engine of this change is the very tide itself. Remember those two tidal bulges? Those great piles of water that are being pulled by the moon? Well, as the earth spins beneath them, it is constantly trying to drag these bulges along with it. But the moon's gravity is trying to keep them aligned with itself. The result is a tremendous amount of tidal friction. Imagine the water in the oceans, especially in the shallow seas, sloshing around and rubbing against the sea floor. This friction acts like a brake, a very, very gentle brake, on the rotation of our planet. It is an almost infinitesimally small effect, but it is relentless. Every single day, for billions of years, the tides have been slowing the Earth's spin. The consequence of this is that our days are getting longer. When the dinosaurs roamed the Earth, a day was only about 23 hours long. Go back further, about 600 million years ago, and a day was closer to 21 hours. The evidence for this is amazing. It's found in the growth rings of ancient corals and shells, which lay down daily and yearly layers, like tree rings. By counting the number of daily rings within a yearly band, geologists can calculate the number of days in a year in the distant past. Since the length of the year, the time it takes the Earth to orbit the Sun, has not changed, a year with more days means each day must have been shorter. But this is only one half of a beautiful cosmic transaction. In physics, there is a fundamental law called the conservation of angular momentum. Momentum cannot simply be lost. It has to go somewhere. As the Earth loses rotational momentum by slowing down, that momentum is transferred to the moon in its orbit. What happens when you add momentum to an orbiting object? It moves into a higher, more distant orbit. And this is exactly what is happening to our moon. The moon is slowly, steadily, spiraling away from the Earth. Modern science has allowed us to measure this with incredible precision. The Apollo astronauts, when they visited the moon, left behind special laser reflectors on its surface. For decades now, observatories on Earth have been shooting powerful laser beams at these reflectors and measuring the exact time it takes for the light to travel to the moon and back. From this, we can calculate the distance to the moon with millimeter accuracy. And these measurements have confirmed it. Every year, the moon drifts approximately 3.8 centimeters, about 1.5 inches further away from the Earth. It's about the same speed at which your fingernails grow. So let us use our scientific imaginations. In the distant past, billions of years ago, the moon was much closer to the Earth. And because of this proximity, its tide-raising force was immensely stronger. The tides on the early Earth would have been colossal, monstrous waves, perhaps, hundreds of feet high, that swept across the planet at incredible speed, because the Earth's day was only a few hours long. Some scientists believe that these enormous rapid tides may have played a crucial role in the origin of life itself. By mixing the chemical-rich waters of the primordial oceans and shallow coastal pools. And what about the distant future? As the moon continues to recede, its tide-raising force will grow weaker. Millions of years from now, the tides will be much smaller, much gentler than they are today. The Earth's rotation will continue to slow, and the days will grow longer. Eventually, in the unimaginably distant future, billions of years from now, the Earth's rotation will have slowed so much that one side will be permanently locked. Facing the moon, the length of an Earth day will be equal to the length of a lunar month. At that point, the tidal breaking will cease, and the moon's retreat will stop. The dance will have reached its final quiet pose. Earth and moon will face each other in a permanent silent embrace as they continue their journey around the sun. There is something profoundly humbling about contemplating this deep cosmic time. We live our lives in such a frantic hurry, don't we? We worry about being late for an appointment, about what will happen next week, about our plans. For next year, our sense of time is so short, so human-scaled. I remember standing on a cliff edge in Hawaii, watching the deep blue of the Pacific Ocean stretch out to the horizon. The sun was setting, and the first hints of the moon were appearing in the twilight sky, and I thought about that 3.8-centimeter drift. But it is nothing. I could not see it. I could not feel it. In my entire lifetime, the moon has moved away from us by only a couple of meters, a tiny insignificant distance. And yet it is happening. That tiny, imperceptible movement is part of a story so vast and so long that it dwarfs all of human history. The very length of my day, the 24 hours I take for granted, is not a constant. It is a fleeting measurement in a process of cosmic evolution that began long before the first signs of life and will continue long after our cities have crumbled to dust. It fills me with a sense of peace, reminds me that we are part of something so much bigger than ourselves. We are living on this planet during a specific chapter of its long, long life. We are privileged to see the tides as they are now powerful, life-giving, and beautiful. We may not be here to see the future when the tides are smaller and gentler, but our great, so many greats, grandchildren will witness a new ocean rhythm. Perhaps they will look back at our time as the age of the great tides. Nature never stops evolving. The mountains are still rising, the continents are still drifting, and the moon is still pulling away. To understand this is to understand that we are not masters of a static world, but temporary passengers on a dynamic living planet. It gives me a sense of responsibility. We should live our lives with a certain grace, knowing that our time here is short, but the story of our world is long. We are a part of that story, and we should strive to make our small chapter a good one. 10. Environmental and cultural importance of tides. The tides are not just science. They are woven into the very fabric of our ecosystems, our cultures, our art, and our souls. My dear friends, as we draw near to the end of our story, I want to talk about what the tides mean. We've explored the physics, the geography, and the cosmic mechanics. We have followed the invisible string of gravity from the moon to the sea. But the true significance of the tides, for us as human beings, goes far beyond the scientific explanation. The tides are a source of life, a wellspring of inspiration, and a cornerstone of culture. From an environmental standpoint, the importance of the tides can hardly be overstated. We've spoken of the intertidal zones, the salt marshes, and the mangroves. These tidal ecosystems are among the most productive on the planet, but their role goes even further. The regular flushing of the tides is essential for maintaining the health of our coastal waters. In estuaries and bays where many of our great cities are located, the tides help to disperse pollutants and prevent their concentration. They circulate oxygen from the surface to the deeper waters. Preventing the formation of lifeless dead zones, they transport the tiny eggs and larvae of countless marine species, ensuring the dispersal and survival of the next generation. The tides are, in a very real sense, the ocean's janitor and its nanny, constantly cleaning and nurturing. If this tidal rhythm were to be disrupted, the consequences would be catastrophic. Our fisheries would collapse. Our coastlines would erode. Our coastal water quality would plummet. The very health of the global ocean is dependent on this constant gravitational pulse. But the importance of the tides resonates far beyond the realm of ecology. It resonates within the human heart. For as long as people have lived by the sea, the rhythmic advance and retreat of the water has been a powerful and enduring metaphor. It speaks to us of cycles, of endings and beginnings, of loss and return. Think of how deeply the tide is embedded in our language and our art. We speak of the tide of history, the ebb and flow of fortune, or of turning the tide in a conflict. These are not just empty phrases. They draw their power from our shared, intuitive understanding of this fundamental natural rhythm. So many poems, songs, and stories were born from the deep, emotional connection between the sea, the moon, and the human spirit. The great Japanese poets like Basho wrote exquisite haikus about the full moon over the water at high tide. The playwrights of ancient Greece used the sea as a backdrop for their great tragedies. Shakespeare, in his plays, often used the imagery of the sea and tides to reflect the turbulent passions of his characters. Virginia Woolf, in her novel To the Lighthouse, uses the steady, rhythmic sound of the waves as a constant, underlying pulse throughout the story, symbol of the passage of time and the persistence of memory. In many coastal cultures, the tides are central to spiritual beliefs and rituals. The ocean is seen as a powerful deity, and the tides are its moods or its breath. Many festivals and celebrations are timed to coincide with the spring tides, particularly those that occur around the equinoxes. These are times of immense natural power, and people gather by the sea to celebrate, to make offerings, and to feel connected to these great cosmic forces. The full moon, which brings the spring tide, is a time of magic, romance, and transformation in countless myths and legends. From around the world, it is a time when the veil between worlds is said to be thin, a time when anything can happen. The tide is a clock, a provider, a shaper of land, a source of power, and a muse for poets. It is a scientific reality and a spiritual symbol that connects the largest objects in our celestial neighborhood with the smallest creatures clinging to a rock. It is a constant reminder that our world is governed by forces far greater than ourselves, and that we are inextricably linked to the grand, silent, and beautiful rhythms of the cosmos. When I was a much younger man, I went through a period of great difficulty and sadness. The world felt chaotic and meaningless to me. My work felt stale, and I felt disconnected from everything and everyone. In despair, I came here to this, a very stretch of coastline, seeking some kind of solace. I did not find it in my books or in my thoughts. My mind was a noisy, tangled place, so I just started walking. Every day for a month, I would walk the length of the beach. I walked at high tide. When the waves crashed near the dunes, their sound a powerful roar. And I walked at low tide, when the sea was a distant murmur and the wet sands stretched out before me like a great, empty stage. I didn't try to think. I just walked, and I watched the tide. I watched it come in, relentlessly, patiently, covering my own footprints from the morning's walk. And I watched it go out, revealing the patterns on the sand, the shells, the stones, the secret landscape beneath. Slowly, day by day, the rhythm of the tide began to seep into me. Its steadiness, its absolute reliability, was a profound comfort. The world of human affairs might be chaotic and unpredictable, but here was a promise that was always kept. Tide would always go out, and it would always come back. The moon would wane, and it would always wax. One evening, I sat on the dunes and watched the full moon rise, its light creating that familiar shimmering path on the water. A line from a poem I had learned as a boy came back to me. It was by John Masefield, and it goes, "I must go down to the seas again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied." And in that moment, I understood. The tide was not just water, it was an emotion. It was a feeling of belonging to the world. The call of the running tide was the call of life itself, a reminder of the great, deep, steady rhythms that underpin all the chaos on the surface. The moon and the waves were working together to keep the earth alive, and in doing so, they were keeping my heart peaceful to me. The ocean is more than water, and the moon is more than rock. They are the two halves of a single, beautiful truth. They are partners in a dance that gives our planet its breath, its life, and its soul. And by watching them, by listening to them, we can find our own rhythm, our own peace, and our own place in the universe. An eternal cosmic dance. So, my dear friends, our journey for tonight is coming to a close. We have traveled from the rocky surface of the moon, across the void of space, and deep into the heart of our own oceans. You have listened so patiently to my story of how the moon and the ocean dance together. We began with a simple idea, an invisible string of gravity. But we discovered that the dance is so much more complex and beautiful than that. We saw how the Earth's spin creates the daily breath of the tides, how the sun joins the dance to create the powerful rhythm of spring and neap tides, and how the unique shape of our continents and coastlines gives every shore its own special song. We learned that this dance provides us with life-giving ecosystems, inspires our art and culture, and even offers us a source of clean, renewable power. And we saw that the dance itself is evolving, a slow, cosmic ballet measured in inches per year and billions of years. This isn't just a piece of science to be memorized for an exam. I hope you feel as I do that it is a profound and beautiful truth. It is a reminder that we are not separate from nature, but are living within it, a part of it. We are all tied to its grand and ancient rhythms. The same forces that move the oceans are at work within us. The iron in our blood was forged in the heart of a star. Just as the earth and moon were born from the same swirling cloud of cosmic dust, we are connected to everything. If this beautiful, silent dance between the moon and the sea were to stop, the earth would indeed lose its heartbeat. And in a world without a heartbeat, how could our own hearts continue to find their rhythm? Have spent many decades studying the world through the lens of science. I have filled notebooks with data and my mind with theories. But the greatest lesson that all those years have taught me is this: living in tune with nature is the secret to a peaceful life. It is so easy in our modern world to become disconnected. We live in climate-controlled houses. We travel in metal boxes. We stare at glowing screens. We can forget the sky, the wind, the earth beneath our feet. We can forget the simple, profound rhythms that govern all life. My wish for you, my dear friends, is that you never forget. I want to encourage you to seek out these rhythms in your own life. You don't need to live by the sea to do it. For the waves, the moon, the tides, even in your quietest days. Notice the phases of the moon from your own window. Feel the change of the seasons in the air. Pay attention to the simple, daily rhythm of sunrise and sunset. These things are the anchors of our existence. They are the steady, dependable heartbeat of the world. When your own life feels chaotic or stressful, when you feel lost or adrift, remember the tide. Remember that even after the most turbulent storm, the tide will continue its calm, patient, rhythmic dance. Connect yourself to that rhythm, and you will find a source of strength and peace that can carry you through anything. You enjoyed this story. If it brought you a measure of peace or wonder, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly love reading them. They're like messages in a bottle that wash up on my shore. Do you have a special memory of the sea or the moon that makes you smile? Favorite beach? A night spent watching the stars? A moment when you felt connected to the natural world? I would be honored if you would share it. And if you feel this story might bring comfort or joy to someone you know, please share this video with your friends and family. Let the wisdom of the waves spread, one person at a time, until we meet again. Your old friend, Science Nap, will be here, by the shore, waiting with another gentle tale to tell. Thank you for listening. Be well, be peaceful, and have a wonderful, restful night. Good night, my dear friends.